Natalia. How's it going?
Hi, Tim. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, and I am really excited to have you on the Coupley Relationship Advice podcast. Thank you so much for making some time for us today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to it as well.
So I want to introduce you to the Coupley community a little bit, so everyone listening to this knows who you are. And guys, we're so lucky to be joined by Natalia today. She is a relationship and self esteem coach. She provides her clients with goal oriented strategies to improve relationships, overcome obstacles. And you specialize in dating, relationships, breakups, cheating, trauma, self esteem, and really smashing those unhealthy patterns.
Yeah.
You've also got a bit of a specialization, which we're going to be digging in today, which is all around toxic relationships. And for us, we if we can understand what a toxic relationship is, then we can try and make sure that we don't either get in one ourselves or unwittingly turn our own relationship toxic. So we're going to be looking into that as a topic today, which I'm super excited to dive into. And before we start, is there anything else that you'd like the coupley community to know about you?
No, I think you did a good job of introducing me. So I'm just ready to get
How
into it.
How did you get into this space though? Let's do like a little bit of a
Yeah.
rewind back. And you've
Okay.
got a pretty nice love story as well, which for the
Oh,
romantics here, they might want to hear.
you mean my online Instagram dating love story? So what do you want to hear first? How I got into this field or how my relationship started?
Let's start with a relationship.
Okay. All right. So I myself met my current partner, my fiance, on Instagram during COVID, actually. So yeah, it wasn't a dating app. We weren't connecting with each other to date because he is from India and I'm from Denmark. So we were just both coaches and we kind of connected and I thought he was attractive and we started talking back and forth. And voila, here we are. I'm actually in India right now with him. So we had to wait for more than a year just talking over video before we actually met in real because it was COVID and the borders were closed, so we couldn't meet each other for such a long time. So it's quite an interesting story. But
And
yeah,
what
it
was it
worked out.
like meeting for the first time after a year of purely online romance? That's a wild story to me.
Oh, I know. I was so nervous. He was so cool. He doesn't get nervous. And I still to this day, I don't understand how he does. He doesn't get nervous. And I was shaking, and my heart was beating. I was walking out from the airport. I was meeting him in Delhi airport. He was coming there to pick me up. And he was just so cool. He was just like, hey, and he was like, gave me a hug, and I was like shaking. So he was calming me down. He was like, it's all right, hi. But really, it's so interesting with him. And actually, I've experienced it with online friends as well, that meeting people in real, it, I haven't experienced it to be a disappointment. Like, it just feels like you're meeting a good friend that you already know so well. And it's just three dimensions now, but
Yeah.
it felt very natural actually after that initial.
You're so right. And I'm thinking about times when I've met online friends as well, either colleagues that you knew through COVID and then you never got to meet them. And then because they had their camera angled a little bit high, you thought they were really little. You're like, oh, this little
Yeah,
fella. And then they come, they're 6'6", and you're like, how are you? How are you this big? And why do you have your camera so high?
I
And then
know.
I've met some friends through online communities. So I was a writer. I've been a writer on Wattpad, and we had a little group of us that probably around the same time we were chatting online for a year. And when we finally went for dinner in London, it was like magical. We just spoke all night long because we knew each other so well.
Was that recently? I saw the pictures on Instagram.
That was online therapist community that I know from
Okay.
TikTok and
All
Instagram
right.
here in Toronto. So if anyone's listening to
Okay.
this as well, and you're like a therapist or in the relationship space in Toronto, hit a brother up, because I love hosting an occasional dinner and just bringing people in the community together. But very, very similar, actually, Natalia, because you're meeting people that you've seen their content, and
Yeah,
from that you generally can get a pretty good vibe of someone. And then it is weird.
true.
You do feel like you know them, and you do know a little bit about them. If you've been
Yeah,
watching their videos for a year or so, you actually do know
for
a little bit
sure.
about them.
Yeah. I love it. So surreal, right? But I love it. I mean, I just love Instagram and
Yeah.
social media. It for me personally, it's given me so much. I've gotten so many friends from social media, so many connections. My partner, like,
Yeah.
thank you, Instagram.
Yeah, a whole life.
Yeah.
We did a study on this around how couples meet. So we did some
Okay.
research on this, and actually DMing on social media was one of the largest ways. So people
Oh,
meet primarily, the biggest one is introductions through friends. And then it was people that they met through work, and then it was online dating, and then it was DMs. So sliding into those DMs is a totally
works.
legitimate way of finding a new partner. So for the guys listening to this, pretty much everyone's in a relationship, but if you know your single friends, I think tell them,
Yeah,
slide, just give it a go.
just
And I
do
have
it.
to ask, on the topic of DMs, who slid into whose DMs first, and how did they do it?
So, so this is how it started. I was looking for some hashtags like healing, something like that on Instagram, right? And so a picture that he had posted came up
Yeah,
randomly
yeah,
on my feed. And I thought, wow, he's really good looking. And then I commented. Um, and then I think, I don't know if he followed me or I followed him, but one of us, I think I probably followed him, to be honest with
nice,
you.
nice.
And yeah, and then he messaged me. Yeah.
Right, I love that. That's very, very cool.
Yeah. But in the beginning, it actually wasn't like, because he was far away and I was in Denmark. Like it didn't have that. It wasn't for
Hmm.
dating purposes that I even commented actually. And I think for him as well, he wasn't in a place at that time. It wasn't flirtatious in the beginning at all. It kind
Hmm.
of developed over time.
Beautiful. Love that.
Mhm.
What an
Mhm.
exciting romance story. That's great. And
Mhm.
and now going in completely the opposite direction, we're going to talk about toxic relationships. And
Yeah.
how did this subject become of interest to you, and how did you end up developing so much expertise?
Yeah. So I've been working with self-esteem for a long time as a self-esteem coach. And I started to see that there was a huge amount of my clients who were struggling with self-esteem that had been in toxic relationships, right? And I work with people who are people pleasers, people who are codependent, people who are anxiously attached, like that's my typical client, right?
Mm,
And so many of them had been in really unhealthy relationship dynamics. So I started to wonder, is there something here that I should be looking into? And then I just went down a rabbit hole and I found out that there's this whole, that toxic relationships are the root of a lot of suffering, in
mm,
people's lives.
mm.
And, it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Do you attract a toxic relationship because you're already feeling emotionally unsafe and
Yeah,
traumatized, or do you become traumatized from the toxic relationship and then you need to work on your self-esteem? And it's a little bit of both, right? So it's because I saw it again and again and again and again that there was a certain type of client that who I was working with. And yeah, so that's where it started. And then now I just more or less solely work with people who, as a relationship coach, but with a hint of self-esteem work, because it's necessary if you're involved in a toxic relationship or have been involved in a toxic relationship previously. Working on your self-esteem is really important.
that makes so much sense. before we go further, I do want to get into a little bit more of the definitions. So, what is the definition of a toxic relationship, or how do you define it specifically?
So I define a toxic relationship as being an unsafe relationship, either emotionally or physically, of course,
Mm.
but usually mostly emotionally unsafe relationship where one or both parties are not able or willing to work on themselves.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
so that last part is really, really important, because if you're sitting there at home thinking, oh my God, but we also have many toxic fights, and I have toxic traits, and he has, and she has. We all have toxic traits, right? So all relationships have elements of toxicity, but the main difference is, are you willing and able to work on yourself? Because if you are not, then the relationship does become toxic, right? Because if you have some dynamics that are really damaging to your partner within yourself and you don't want to work on them, that's the
Mm.
recipe for a toxic relationship. That makes sense.
It makes complete sense. And that lack of growth, that lack of self
Mhm.
growth that's I think the one that probably would scare me the most in a
Yeah.
relationship. That would be the one where I don't think I could get around it, is
Yeah.
when people can't take responsibility or they're not willing to change. The sentence for me that I drives me mad when I hear it is when people say, "Well,
Mm.
that's just that's just who I am. Take it or leave it. That's just who I am.
Yeah.
That's it."
I
Because you feel like
know.
there's no way to get around it, and
Mm.
it's like not taking any accountability. And I think maybe as someone that has more of that empathetic people pleasing, it's such an affront to like the culture that I try and carry, is this idea
Yeah.
of like empathizing and understanding. Um,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's just who I am, take it or leave it. Yeah, that's someone saying that is not a person who is ready for a full-blown relationship, I
mm,
would say. I mean,
mm,
and also I mean, often toxic relationships are either people who are emotionally, like one or both parties are either emotionally immature, or maybe there's some narcissism involved, or
mm.
some other kind of personality disorder will
Yeah.
often be there, and then it's hard to work with, because most of these people are not able to really work on themselves, even if they say that they want to. So,
So
but yeah.
thinking about the audience listening to this, what are some things that you see or have seen that are those toxic patterns so that people can kind of identify them in their own relationships?
Yeah. So, do you mean early on, or just in general in the relationship?
General in the relationship, typical
Okay.
things that people might see. It could be things like repetitive arguments. It could be things
Yeah.
like behavior. And if so, like what are the specifics that you get into that you see over and over
Yeah.
again? I'm sure there
Yeah.
are patterns,
Yeah,
and
there are.
I'm really like kind of curious because if we can identify those patterns, and the people listening to this can kind of know.
Yeah, I understand. So, typically it will involve one person, usually mostly caring about themselves and not taking their partner's emotions into consideration, right? So the relationship is all about them. They don't have a lot of empathy for the other person's situation. Everything has to kind of um, the relationship is kind of supply for that person to feed their ego or their need for love and protection, but they're not really giving back. So it's one sided. That would be one
Dynamic.
red flag. If you're with someone and you don't feel that the love is being reciprocated, that the you know generosity, whatever it may be, is being reciprocated, then it's not fully balanced, the relationship, right? And then there are the obvious ones, which is um emotional abuse, lying to a certain I think we're all kind of tell this little white lie here and there, but I
Hmm.
mean, like, lying about serious things, um very violent fights, of course, below the belt, like
Oh, that's
how do you say, like,
interesting. That's
you know what I mean? Like,
interesting. Yeah, talk more
yeah.
about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a certain level of decency, right, that has to be there in a fight with a partner. Like, you can't just call your partner a fucking whore. I mean, I'm sorry for
Yeah.
my language, but like in the middle of the fight, like that's not okay. You know what I mean? Like, there has to be certain things you don't say and a certain level of respect, even when you're fighting, even when you're hurt, right?
I I think there's a there's a quote which is around, if you want to understand if a couple's going to make the distance or not, look at the way that they fight. And obviously the work from the Gottmans
Mm.
has really dove deep into doing the longitudinal research around the percentage of couples that stay together and how kind they are during arguments to one another, the magic
Wow.
ratio
Yeah.
they call it. And thinking about that is really interesting around how below the belt behavior, and you know it when you
Mm.
see it, but it means in a fight, are you someone that's stooping low? And you know when you
Mm.
do that. And I've
Yeah.
definitely done this in the past before I
Me too.
really learned more about how damaging this is, because you sort of, it's when you feel a bit desperate, you feel like you're losing an argument. And I've spoken about this on the podcast a lot. One of my previous toxic traits that I'm so glad to have abandoned was this idea of winning and losing an argument and winning and losing a conversation. Went to like debate club at university
Mm.
and learned how to debate, and you learn how to argue really
Yeah.
well and deconstruct someone else's argument and pull it apart to
Yeah.
win. And that idea of winning is so damaging. And I think
Yeah.
going below the belt is almost like that emotional art, emotional warfare. I was going to say art of war, but it's not really art. It's just like emotional warfare. It's like
Mhm.
nuclear warfare for your relationship, in which you'll end
Yeah.
up poisoning the entire battlefield. And guess what? That battlefield is also the garden of your love, the place where you're supposed to
Yeah.
raise your children, the land that you're supposed to build this house and have this
Totally.
amazing life of. And if you're throwing nuclear weapons, if you're throwing like poisoned bombs at one another through this below the belt behavior,
Yeah.
and you never forget the things when people say something horrible to you in an argument
Mhm.
like that, you
I
just
was
don't
just
forget
going
it.
to say that it's like you might apologize later, but the other person, believe me, they are going to remember whether you apologize or not, whether you say, "Oh, baby, I didn't mean it." Doesn't matter. They're going to remember.
and you,
So
and
if you
you
said
can
something
you
really devastating about their family, that can be also usually something that's really below the belt to go after someone's family, like your partner's family in a fight, for example. You can't take it back, you can't really take it back. So,
it's a it's a it's a really interesting topic, and it's a really interesting indicator to look at both in early relationships and longer relationships, because
mm,
now we're talking about it, you can see when how people react when things don't go their way, even
mm,
even in a little bit earlier on in the relationship. You can spot the ways that, just if people have some have some adversity, how they react to it, how they treat the people around them. And even if you're in the honeymoon period, so you're not getting that flack, you're not picking up that fire, you can be fucking sure that after that honeymoon period is over, if they're directing that to waiters, your Uber driver, the
for
whoever's trying to
sure.
help them, whatever this interaction is, or even listening to how they speak about other people, be it at work, be it their friendship circle, like eventually that
For sure.
turret is gonna get turned
Gonna be
around on
directed at
you.
you. Yeah, you learn so much by seeing how they treat other people, especially like you say, like people who are below their status, or
Mm,
people who are,
mm-mm.
yeah, you can't really say someone's below, but like for a narcissist, for example, someone that they would consider to be beneath them.
Yeah.
Um, but there are many, I just want to put a big disclaimer here. Many of these things we're talking about with fights and so forth, it can be worked on as well. If you're two genuinely good people with good intentions and you have bad patterns when it comes to fighting and you don't know how to handle your emotions and you overreact and so, if you want to work on it, and if you do work on it, it's all right. Like, so if you're sitting at home listening right now and you're thinking, oh my God, my relationship is doomed because when we fight, we stoop so low and, you know, but there are many other things. There is also the silent treatment I mean, many people do it, but it's not a healthy way of dealing with conflict.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of like a punishment.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many things, but again, if you want to work on it, you can work your way out of having toxic arguments. So just having arguments alone in a toxic way doesn't necessarily mean you have a toxic relationship,
Yeah.
right? So it's like many of these factors, they have to be there, like present, all many of them, just not just one. Sorry, like
Yeah.
sometimes my English, my brain is thinking in Danish and my mouth is speaking in
And all
English.
of it is sounding beautiful and making complete sense. I think
Okay, I'm glad to hear it.
I really like that you've raised that because it leads us towards a path of people actually having a conversation about the way that they argue specifically. And I think that's such a great practice for couples to do, is to have a little look back, and you have to be really careful to not get into the he said, she said, but you can say, hey, team, we are, you know, team team Harry and whatever it is, Harry and Harriet,
Yeah,
and we have to create our own charter of how we're going to argue and the things that
yeah.
we can agree on. And here are
Mm.
behaviors that we know that we are open with. We are going to do our real best to not raise our voices at one another, to not shout at each other. And if we are shouting at each other, we probably know that we need to like take a little cool down. We're going to do our best to talk about things that this is bringing up for us and not hide it behind justifications, but actually try and pull out the emotions. And if we don't know what those emotions are, say like, hey, this is triggering something in me and I'm feeling really fucking pissed
Yeah,
off. I don't 100% know what it is right now, but this isn't, I'm feeling a lot of things. Um,
yeah,
and
so true.
then, and then creating sort of like these rules of warfare, not going after each other's families, not going after, if you are going after your partner's friends because you believe that they're a bad influence on them, just trying to do it in like a structured way and a fair way, and not going for this below the belt behavior. And you kind of have to define what that is within your own relationship. But I feel like it's one of those
Yeah,
things, you know, if you've ever done any kind of combat sports, you get kicked below the belt, you know it when it happens.
yeah,
You
and
definitely
it's
know, you definitely
painful.
feel
I
it.
bet. Yeah, exactly. And I think just it's important to say as well that no one knows how to do this unless they practice. Because we are not taught how to handle our emotions in school. We're not taught how to fight. What is it? What is the right way to fight? What is the wrong way to fight? Like we all grow up completely clueless unless we had parents who really knew how to do these things and who could teach us. But most of us, we don't know, right? So you guys, you also need to cut yourself a little slack and your partner a little slack if you make mistakes and you accidentally, you know, do the silent treatment or you do, you know, stoop really low. And it's just about looking inwards and the willingness to work on yourself, right? Because no one really knows what they're doing. We're just all learning here how to have good fights. That
One of
makes
the things that you
sense.
spoke about as well was when one partner seems to be in it for themselves and not really have much
Yeah.
empathy and not really care, they just care a little bit less. They care a little bit
Yeah.
less, and somehow that ends up giving them more power, probably because it's the old avoidant attachment dynamic perhaps at play a little bit. But what can someone do there? Because it often drives the person who's perhaps more anxiously attached to distraction because they don't feel
Mm,
loved, and then they start feeling more insecure. When they start feeling more insecure, they can start having more problematic behaviors or seeking to
mm.
cling towards their partner or make their partner want them, which can drive their partner further away. Like, what are some of the things that you see there, and how do we get into how do you help couples when that cycle becomes toxic.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mention it because one of the classical toxic relationships is the avoidant anxious one, you
Yeah.
know, because those two attachment styles, they're just not compatible, yet they somehow magically always seem to find each other, these
I
people,
love
right?
that. Yeah.
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 And so I see a lot of that. And in such relationships, they both have some work to do and they both have something to learn from each other, right? Because what we want an anxious and an avoidant to do is to work towards becoming more secure in their attachment, right? So we want the avoidant partner to be able to open up a little and rely a little bit on their partner without fear of rejection. And we want the anxious partner to learn how to regulate his, her, their own emotions.
When,
So yeah, so
yeah.
they each
Go.
have some work to do.
Mm,
Yeah, they each have some work to do. So if I would work with a couple who have avoidant, where one is avoidant and the other is anxious, I would give them each their homework,
mm,
because they individually have to work towards becoming secure, and then that's where they can meet, right? But avoidance and anxious partners, they have, like I said, they have so much to learn from each other, right? Because the avoidant is dealing with the emotions all by himself, herself, and the anxious one is completely desperate for someone else to regulate their emotions, right?
yeah.
So it's yeah, but that's if these people are not self-aware, it would definitely qualify as a toxic relationship because it's not compatible. And
Yep.
there's a lot of unconscious sabotaging behavior.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned as well, it can be from the anxious person not getting their needs met, or the avoidant person pushing away and just being completely self-sufficient and selfish.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
What is some of that anxious behavior that you've seen or examples that you can share?
Yeah, so becoming controlling, constantly wanting reassurance, becoming very, very needy, acting out, making drama to get attention, maybe even going out and cheating or making the partner jealous. It's like, it's anything that the anxious person can do. It depends on how desperate they are, but acts of desperation is what I see from the anxious partner,
I
right?
think of it as well as like when you're anxiously attached and you're getting activated and you're becoming unhealthy in your attachment, you start playing 4D chess. They are playing 4D chess in their relationship, and their poor partners on the other side of the board just not even playing. I don't know what the
Yeah.
basic game is, but probably snakes and ladders, where they're just taking one step in the
Yeah,
same direction, and the anxious
no.
person is trying to build a web of 4D chess
Yeah,
around them, thinking of every
yeah.
single thing, looking at every single possibility. And if you have friends like that are more anxiously attached, and you have conversations about them when they're going through stuff, it'll be a 2 hour fucking rant. And at the beginning, it's like you've just walked through a jungle with them. Your hair is everywhere. Your clothes are torn. You're completely confused, and all roads have kind of gone in a spiral. And you finish that conversation absolutely exhausted. Like, oh god, this is why
I
therapists
know.
exist.
Yeah, and you know what? And that's exactly because the anxious person is looking for someone to regulate their emotions because they don't
Mm,
know how to do that for themselves. So
mm,
if they can't do it through the partner, they're going to try and do it through the friends
mm.
or the family. It's
Yeah.
because they don't know how to do it. So they just have to learn how to do it.
And awareness is so good for this. I'm definitely someone that's more on the anxious style. I'm very secure, thank God. But I definitely, and it depends. Like if I'm feeling
Yeah.
less confident, I start feeling more anxious. Um, when I've been in relationships that are less like secure, or I'm not sure where I stand, then the anxiousness starts to get dialed up.
Mm.
And knowing that you have these tendencies is so powerful, because you can just start thinking like, okay, That's the attachment style kicking in, like, hello, my old friend. Thank you for all
Yeah.
these thoughts. They're not that helpful, but definitely appreciate
Mm,
what you're trying to do here. But this whole nest of weird problem solving stuff isn't actually that useful
mm,
for my relationship all my life. And then when
yeah.
you speak to avoidance, oh my gosh, they are just shut down. Like if I try and talk to my avoidant friends about their relationship stuff when they're going through it, they're very good at boundary setting.
Oh
Like I
yeah.
was talking to a friend about his stuff the other day, and he was just like, I really appreciate you checking in on me. I do not want to talk about this with you or with anyone. And
Oh,
I was
okay.
like, oh, so
All right.
that's the
Fair
old
enough.
avoidant attachment
All
style. So
right.
let's get it.
Yeah.
That probably means you should talk about it, really. Um, Maybe not with me or with a trusted professional, but it's just I don't really set those boundaries. Like if I'm upset about something,
Mm,
I have to talk about it. I definitely feel like I need to
yeah.
discuss things. It helps me
Yeah.
clarify them in my own mind, but then I you also kind of have to take that little and like be aware when it's healthy and when it's not, right?
Yeah. I know, but in many ways, I feel I have so much compassion for avoidance actually, because it's so lonely. It's super lonely being avoidant. Like you don't let anyone in,
Hmm.
really.
Hmm.
And you have kind of shut down that part of yourself, or you're at least you're working so hard to just shut off your emotions and not feel anything and just, but you can't really do that. Like
Hmm.
you're still going to have your feelings, you're just not going to be consciously aware of them. So I actually, yeah. Whenever there's an insecure attachment style, there's so much trauma there and there's a lot of pain there,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but ideally, everyone would partner up with someone secure
Yeah.
because because both the avoidant and the anxious and the fearful avoidant, they are all more comfortable with someone secure,
Yeah. And I do
especially,
and I do think it's one of those things that you build together as well. It's a secure
yeah,
relationship together, and
yeah,
like you
sure.
and it's really cool to build that with your partner as well. Just that
Oh yeah,
brick by brick, plank by plank,
sure. Yeah,
over years and years and years, feeling this secure space and this safe space and this place where you can be yourself, where your partner can be yourself, where you can push each other but find the best in each other. And I do really believe that no matter your attachment style, with the work,
yeah.
with a lot of work,
With
it's
the
building a
work, it's
house.
the
Is building a
cleaning.
house with someone easy? No. Doing
No, it's
IKEA
not.
with furniture with someone isn't even easy. So building a whole relationship that's supposed to last the rest of your life,
No.
obviously it's going to be a little bit
Oh my
hard.
God, it's so hard. Yeah, exactly. And I think, yeah, and you also it's so this topic of the toxic relationships, I'm going to kind of repeat myself again and again because it's so important um to remember the definition, because we are all going to go through rough patches, right?
Yeah.
And we're all going to have toxic behaviors. Hell, a person who's a good person can even cheat once
Hmm.
and get over it and never do it again. And like, all kinds of things can happen if you're going to be with someone for the rest of your life and you have a marriage and you have a long relationship. So many things can happen. And it doesn't mean you have a toxic relationship, right? So while these things we're talking about, they're red flags and they're definitely indicators of a toxic relationship. Um, yeah, then it doesn't necessarily mean that. And then that's not the last time I'm going to say it now.
And what are some of these really core things that you recommend couples to do to make sure that they're pulling things, they're creating these structures in their relationship or these patterns or these behaviors that elevate
Mhm.
our relationship out of the toxicity? What are some of the things that you
Yeah,
recommend?
I think it's really healthy to get some kind of therapy or coaching individually or together or both, ideally, because sometimes it's hard to see things when we're in it. It can be hard for someone to witness their own patterns and really understand. Like most people, they don't know about attachment styles. And if they
Mm,
start seeing someone professional, they'll learn and then they can do their research. So, and if you don't want to work with someone professionally, then do your research, go on YouTube, listen to podcasts, educate yourself on how to build a healthy relationship, because it does take a lot of work from both parties. It really, really does. So I recommend educating yourself and then going on your own healing journey. Like you need to figure out what you are contributing with to this relationship that is not healthy, right? Because it's not your partner's fault that you have trauma. And also your partner is not your therapist, right?
Mm.
So you can't expect your partner to be the one, even though it would be great. And it does happen sometimes that partners can like help each other heal. And, it is part of the relationship, but it's not your partner's responsibility for you to clean up your side of the street,
Mm.
right? So I think taking accountability for the individuals in the relationship is really important as well. Not putting it onto a partner, but just really ourselves, working through our issues. Yeah.
I've got a question for you, and this one's a bit off piste, but do you think it matters? Do you have to, if you can change your behavior, does it matter where that behavior was coming from? Or do you think it's like a weed? So, say for example, you grew up in an unstable household, and so people pleasing is your way of creating safety in your life. So this is why you tend to do people pleasing behaviors as
Mm,
a theoretical model.
yeah.
So you know that because of that, you don't create good boundaries, and because of that, you get things build up and up and up, and then you explode, or create problems. So that you know that you need to be better at um, calling people out earlier and creating boundaries in your life. You know that that behavior is what needs to happen. Do
Mm.
you think that it's okay to just change the behavior and be like, I'm going to get better at making boundaries? Or do you think it's one of those things where under the soil is the weed, and then there's the roots that is into your childhood and all the reasons that you do this behavior? Do you think you actually have to pull that out, or is it good enough to be like, I know that I need to have a good ratio in an argument of positive
Mm.
sentiments. So therefore, I'm going to make sure to do a positive, create some sort of positivity even when we're fighting, versus I'm getting triggered because I was bullied or abandoned as a child. Like, what are your thoughts around this behavior versus sort of going in deep?
Yeah. Pulling it out at the root. Because the thing is, you might be able to change the behavior and it
Mm,
might work for you. You might start setting boundaries. But what about that need to people please that started that behavior in the first place? It's just going to show up in another area of your life. That's the thing. So if you don't pull it up at the root, you might be able to change this particular thing about setting boundaries. But if there's still this big wound within
mm,
you, this big trauma that you haven't worked through, of wanting other people's validation all the time, it's going to show up in other places, right? So you're not really overall going to better your life that much just by learning a new behavior. That's how I see it. Ideally, both.
yeah.
That would be the best to do both.
Very interesting. And I guess I want to start wrapping things up here. I think we've covered like an amazing array of topics within this toxic relationship. I think we've given people some really cool tools and ideas and things that they can do. Are there any final recommendations or things that you want to add, Natalia, to this?
Yes. One of the most important things to work on, in my experience, is radical self acceptance.
Oh.
Because most of the fights we have with our partners and other people in our lives, they are based on projection. They're based on us somehow not accepting ourselves, not feeling good within ourselves. And now we're back to the self-esteem. So working on accepting yourself as you are and building your own self-esteem is going to improve every single aspect of your life, including your relationship, right? You know that old saying, like, you can't really love others until you truly love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there is some truth to that.
Can you give some examples of radical self-acceptance where it would come down to a specific part of someone's personality or their life or something about them that needs to be accepted?
Yeah, radical self-acceptance is easy when you're doing great.
Mm.
It's easy when you're successful, when your partner is happy with you, when you look amazing. Radical self-acceptance becomes hard when you've gained weight, when you got fired from the job, when your boyfriend dumped you, when life isn't so great. Then the negative voice starts inside our heads, and most of us really mean to ourselves inside our own
Mm.
heads, right? So the radical self-acceptance is accepting that you have a lot of flaws, and that's okay. It's okay. You're not good at everything. Some people are not going to like you. Some people are going to dump you. Some boyfriends are not going to want to be with you. And accepting that without needing to be perfect in every area, right? There's this perfectionism. Everyone wants to be perfect, but nobody is perfect, right? And so, and it's very painful, not accepting that you have flaws, and it's very powerful to accept that you have flaws. Like, I can give you an example. For example, me. I'm so bad at sports. Like, I was always picked last in school, and I'm like, I have this. I'm double jointed, so like my joints are super loose, and it's just not my thing. Like, I can have fun with it, but I'm not good at it. And I used to be so ashamed of that, and whenever there were like friends wanted to do sports, I would just be like, no, I'll just watch. But now I really have accepted it. So if someone comes over to me and laughs at me, or like, oh, why do you run like that? Why are your joints like so loose? It doesn't bother me. I'll just look at them and I'll say, yeah, I know, no, that's not my strength. That's, it's fine. But if I hadn't accepted that about myself, a comment like that would have completely destroyed me,
Mm.
so yeah, and the more we accept ourselves, the more we can accept others, including their flaws.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
and we learn so much about how to treat other people by how they treat themselves.
Oh my God. Yeah. And
And
other people learn so much about how to treat us by how we treat ourselves.
yeah, I always think of this. I always think of this quote as like how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I hate
Yeah.
this quote so much. I hate it because I'm not typically a perfectionist, but I know that some people live by that, and it just repeats. Like when I'm loading the dishwasher, when I'm clearly not putting the effort of loading the dishwasher right, I just fucking put everything in. Just want it clean and done. I don't want it. It doesn't need to look perfect. There are two types of people in the world, right? The type that loads it perfectly, and then the other, then us. And
Well,
and then that
yeah,
quote
I'm
just replaying in my
definitely part
mind,
of the
like how
second
you do
group.
one thing is how you do everything.
Yeah. I
It's
don't think that's true, though. I really don't think that saying is true. I
no.
mean, for me personally, I feel like with some things I'm so lazy and messy, and with other things I'm extremely organized and perfectionistic. Yeah.
I do think though that you've really touched on something very powerful in that how that around that how people see you treat yourself, how people hear you talk about yourself really has a massive impact. I was watching the new
Mm.
Squid Game yesterday. Absolutely
Oh,
amazing TV show. I really recommend people watch it just from
okay.
a psychology perspective. They interviewed one of the characters and she was really dynamic. She was making friends, building alliances in this Squid Game show. And then when they interviewed her, she said, for me, I'm 4'11", so I'm really short. Everyone looks down on me. People look down on me physically and mentally. I don't even have a boyfriend, and I'm 23 and I'm single. I I don't have kids. I don't have family. I don't have anyone who's close to being a husband. And meanwhile, my friends are all in relationships and even getting married, and I just don't have anything. And I remember thinking like, wow, what a negative way to look at
Present yourself.
yourself.
Yeah. Ooh, it's
And
painful to be inside that head.
yeah, and
Mm.
no, from me watching the show, I was like, oh, you're so personable. Um, you're building like great friendships. She seemed really cool. I was like, you seem like such a cool person. And I'm like, oh, you're single, great. I'm sure loads of people would want to date you. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
The way that
And
you hear people talk about themselves is it just really it it's really important.
yeah, it really, really is. Yeah, and it's very painful to be one of those people who talk very negatively about themselves because that means they're very hard on themselves inside their own head as well. So,
Yeah. And exhausting probably to be in a relationship with someone as
oh
well.
my God, yeah.
Because
Because
then you're
the
sort of
thing
like,
is that
well,
if you're, yeah,
yeah, go on.
no, I was just gonna say if your partner is very critical of themselves, they're going to be very critical of you. It's just
Hmm.
that's just how it works.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. Well, this is great. Natalia, how can people get in touch with you? Where do they find more about you? You're famous, a little bit
Oh.
famous on Instagram. So how can people follow you? Let's talk more about that.
Okay, so people can follow me. I make little skits on Instagram about relationships. And it's Nathalia Christensen. I don't know if I should spell it out.
We will include it in the show notes below.
All right. So it's Natalia with an H, Christensen, CH. Um, and it's the same name on both TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. All right. So you can follow me there. Unfortunately, I will say my TikTok, I'm not that active because TikTok is banned in India.
Oh.
So whenever I'm in Denmark, I can happily upload my videos and everything is fine. But then as soon as I go to India again with Sarjeet, then yeah, then for a while, as long as I'm here, I can't upload anything. So yeah, but you can still follow me there. And once I'm in Denmark, I'll be uploading again.
Do you have
Yes.
space for clients for self-esteem and relationship coaching at the moment? And if so, how can people get in touch?
Yeah, I do have a couple of spaces. I will say I'm almost fully booked, but you can always message me and then you can get on a wait list if I'm completely booked out. They can either connect with me through my website, which you can maybe also include in your notes. It's nataliachristensen.com. There's a form on my website where you can request for just a 15-minute meetup call. I recommend doing that. Or you can message me on Instagram, but it's more likely that I'll respond if you go through the website because on Instagram I get a lot of DMs and I don't necessarily see all of them in the right time. So yeah, I recommend doing that.
Natalia, it's been so great to have you on the show. If you've listened to this and enjoy it, please subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube, and push like. It only takes a few seconds. That's me and Natalia's only ask of you today. Give us a like and a subscribe, please. Um, Thank you for being on the Coupley Relationship Advice podcast.
So
What a
welcome.
wonderful conversation, and
It was fun.
it was really, really great. So thank you.